Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. Hello, everybody. Greetings and welcome to the Kent Branch September educational presentation. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Cindy Robichaux, and I am part of the Kent Branch operating team and your host for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us on this Friday night. I'm going to turn my camera off just so that we can focus on the slides. Before we begin tonight's presentation, we wish to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation in Kent County, specifically on the territories of the Lenape Nation and the Walpole Island Nation. We do have a couple of housekeeping items. Our presentations are recorded and they are available on our Kent Branch YouTube channel so that you can go back and watch it again to review it or if you missed something. Your microphones and cameras have been turned off, but we welcome your questions. If you hover your mouse near the bottom of your screen, you will see the bar with the chat icon. If you click on it, the chat box will open. Click on the little arrow that's beside the word everyone, and you can change that to the word questions. Here you can type your message or your questions for us and for the speaker. Angela Churchill is with us tonight, and she will be monitoring the chat box. So let's get started. For anyone who is joining us tonight for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about Ontario Ancestors. Ontario Ancestors have been preserving and promoting family history for over 50 years. There are over 30 branches all across Ontario, and we are the largest genealogical society in Canada. And there's so much more that I can't even begin to talk about tonight. So please be sure to go check out the website. And as I mentioned, there's more than 30 branches all across Ontario. So we are the Kent Branch. We focus on Kent County research and general family history. We offer mentoring and education and assistance. We host monthly presentations, and we have a fantastic resource library. Our Family History Resource Library is located on the second floor of the Chatham-Kent Public Library in Chatham. It is a gem of genealogical resources for Chatham-Kent, and we are finally open to the public again. For the month of September, we will be open on Friday and Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. We are, however, still looking for more volunteers to help us as we need to open more days to allow visitors to come and do their family history research. So if you would like to know more about volunteering, or if you just want to connect with us, you can email us at this address on the screen. You can also join our Kent Branch Facebook group, which has almost 700 people who are interested in genealogy and general Kent County history. And it is a very good place to ask questions and to share some information. And we also have a very comprehensive website with lots of resources for both our branch members, but we also have a lot of stuff there for the public. We have also been very busy over the summer months, and we wanted to tell you about a couple of things we've been working on. Our Front Porch Drop-Off initiative continued over the summer, and we had several things dropped off to us. We had a box of beautiful photos, a scrapbook, and funeral cards that were saved from the trash. We had a set of personal diaries that dated back 1897 to 1939, and we had other historical materials and items dropped off. If you have, or if you find historical or genealogical material, we would be glad to receive it, to preserve it, and share it with others. Also this summer, Colleen LeBay, who was our tech chair, and Paige Roman, who is our intern, began our newest project. We have partnered once again with the Chatham-Kent Public Library to begin digitizing their newspaper index card collection. This will be a very big project for us, and Colleen and Paige have done a tremendous amount of technical work to get this project up and going. There are literally thousands of cards, each containing a wealth of genealogical information. We're currently working on step number 1, which is to scan each individual card. We will be looking for volunteers to assist with step number 2, which will be to transcribe all these images. Colleen and Paige have built a system which will allow volunteers to work on this project, the transcribing part, from their homes, literally from anywhere. Colleen is with us tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to Colleen so that she can speak a little bit about this project. Colleen?
Thank you, Cindy, and good evening, everyone. So as Cindy indicated, the second part of the project is to actually transcribe the cards. And that project it's actually available now. I just put it up on our website this evening, and you can find it under projects. So you'll see on the slide, there's some sample cards. Those are what the cards look like from the card catalog. And what we've done is we've started with the drawers that we've scanned. So you'll see there are 8 drawers there, and they start at the top of the alphabet, and we're down through the B's. And there is a folder of card images, and there's a worksheet that goes with that drawer. And it's a pretty simple process. We're going to ask you to open the worksheet and open the folder and transcribe what you see on the cards into the worksheet. If you are new to transcribing or you'd really like to get some detailed instructions, we are going to run a training session on Thursday, September 23rd at 7 p.m. And if you go to the website and look for this project, the registration link is there, as well as detailed instructions. If you actually just want to get started, if you're an experienced transcriber, you can probably just look at the instructions, as well as my email. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help out. And hopefully we'll see you out on Thursday, September 23rd to help us kick off our project. I'll pass it back to you, Cindy.
Great, thanks, Colleen. Yeah, so this is really, really exciting. A lot of people have asked for many, many years, you know, if we could get something going with these cards, and the library has been so gracious with us. And with COVID, it really was the leverage for us to initiate the project, because there was no access to this information at all, and people really missed it. So that's maybe the one good thing that came out of COVID, was that, you know, this project was put back on the table, considered, and here we are off and running with it. So as I mentioned before, it's going to be a huge project, and we are going to need many, many hands. So we hope you will join us on Thursday to get a little more information about it and some training. So we're really excited about this and looking forward to this project. Okay, we do have our fall presentation all lined up. In October, Rachel Sear will be discussing how her research into the mysterious Captain Keating of Chatham eventually led to discovering her Ojibwe roots. And in November, Brian Anderson will join us to share a few skeletons in his county heritage, along with some nice surprises that he found along the way. You can find out more information about these presentations and the links to register on our website, and also we post on our Facebook group. So we hope you will join us. And then if you have Scottish roots, you may be interested in the Scottish Tapestry event coming to Chatham in October. The exhibit will be displayed at the Chatham Capitol Theatre in the Rotary Room from October 13th until October 29th, with a special opening event on October the 12th. The Tulip Tree Needle Art Guild has created a tapestry depicting and celebrating the Scottish Baldoon settlement established in Kent County in 1804 by Lord Selkirk. The Baldoon panel will be displayed along with 37 other Canadian panels. We are very pleased to assist the organizers of this event. And Linda Patterson, our publicity chair, has been assisting on behalf of Kent Branch. So now let's get to tonight's presentation by Deanna Bullard. Deanna has had a long time passion for history and the museum field. She has worked at the Black Creek Pioneer Village in the education department as an education coordinator for the Chatham-Kent Museum for 22 years. And currently, she works at the Oil Museum, Canadian National Historic Site, as the reception and visitor engagement clerk. Working with museums has always kept her lifelong learning needs met, and she says there's always something to learn at the museum. On the genealogical side, Deanna's maternal line can be traced arriving in Canada approximately 1787, when James Urquhart of the River Thames is first documented in Windsor as a shopkeeper. And then on her paternal side, Deanna's Canadian roots can be traced to 1639, wow, when Martin Prevost arrived in Quebec from France. Martin married Marie Oliver Sylvester, her Christian name, in 1644. And this couple is the first recorded marriage in Canadian documents of a Frenchman and a First Nation woman. Deanna, we're excited to have you join us, and we're looking forward to your presentation, and we will get started right away. If you want to say hi to everybody.
Hi.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share your presentation. So Deanna, we're so happy that you could join us tonight and share a little bit of your expertise. Let me start your presentation.
Yep.
I should probably do this first and then this.
Yeah, the oil boom in Bothwell. In 1863, we get oil struck there, but there's a long history of oil in the Bothwell area prior to 1863. When oil was struck in Bothwell, it had 500 people before the boom. So we're going to explore that boom and what it did to our town of Bothwell. Now, before we get started into that rich history, I'm going to take you on a little look at some of the oil terms that I'm going to use throughout the presentation. One of the things we need to look at first and foremost is the pump jack. The pump jack is a very important piece that was developed out of the oil springs area and the boom there. But it did work its way to Bothwell and helped to get that oil out of the ground. So if you take a look at it, this pump jack is situated in front of the museum I'm at, the Oil Museum of Canada. And I've got just a few of the parts labeled for you. We have the walking beam, we have the Samson post, we have that part called the horse head. Hanging from that horse head, you will get the polished rod. Through and underneath that polished rod, which we can't now see in this picture, but you can see where that arrow is without a label on it. This is in the area I'm talking. That polished rod extends down into something called the sucker rod. And in that sucker rod, there is a series of valves that brings up that wonderful black gold. Now, these are important things to remember. The pump jack, though, is a later innovation. So let's go back just a little bit more. We're going to take a look here at the Threepole Derricks. Now, sorry, I'm sure this pic is a little chilly to look at, but it gave me the best definition of the Threepole Derrick. Now, there are two here that you can see, and then I have a little inset of the top of it. The primary purpose of a Threepole Derrick is to get things out of the hole that you've created. And I'll show you how you created that hole in just a second. One of the things you got to pull out of there is your piping. You will also have to pull out any blockages in the piping. And oilmen would use a variety of tools called fishing tools to get out the blockages. And in the very early days of the oil fields, the three-pole derrick was invaluable for getting out your buckets of dirt, rock, and anything else you broke loose down there when you were using your spring pole. So let's take a look at a spring pole now. Here it is. Now, a spring pole made it easier, and I'm going to use that term loosely, but it made it easier to dig and possibly to get through the rock that you're digging down to that black gold. You could dig by hand for about 80 to 100 meters, and that's 250 to 330 feet. And at that point, this is where things start getting risky when you're hand digging. You are susceptible to structural failure. You've got heat down there. You've got a lack of oxygen going on because there are now gases probably starting to escape. And yes, people died from them on the oil fields. Now, to make a spring pole work, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is jump up and down on this plate, or kind of looks like a treadle for those of you that are familiar with spinning wheels and things. So you've got this plate or treadle that you can jump up and down on, and it's going to spring back. And you can also work it with one leg at a time, pumping it up and down. And then after a while, you're going to switch legs. Sometimes you had a type of a rope loop that you would then wrap around your foot, and you would use a kicking motion to make the spring pole go up and down. And when you're doing that, what's actually going on, this hole that you're now digging, you have this chisel, this metal chisel basically at the end of it, and you are smashing it against the rock. That's tough work, as you can imagine, and it is tiring work. So how far are you going to get? Well, in a day, you can get about a good foot further into that rock. Yeah, a foot, 30 centimeters. If you're lucky, it's going to depend on the type of rock you're in to get down there. So it is, like I say, this is hard stuff, and you better be very, very dedicated to what you're doing. All right, we've got the basics of what's going on in the oil fields. So let's take a look and see who was using oil first. Now, oil was discovered long before we found it here in North America. It has been used throughout history. We know the ancient Egyptians used it. We know the Romans used it. But when did we start using it here? Now, that's the part that's difficult to say. Now, a colleague of mine this summer shared some of the information she was looking at. She was looking at the first uses of oil here in North America, and mainly with our First Nations people. We know they were using it, but when they started, we're not sure. Archaeologists discovered these mystery pits throughout the oil fields of Titusville, Pennsylvania. And these mystery pits date back as far as 1550. There could be earlier ones. The pits were hand dug and reinforced with timber and wood cribbing. They also found around these sites, there were remnants of antlers and stone tools and things of that nature. So we know our First Nations people were using them, but what were they using it for? Well, there is evidence they used it as medicine, both internal and external. There is evidence that they used it as pitch. They would boil it. There are some tanks. I'm going to call them tanks. But these pits where they used to process the oil, and they would turn it into a type of pitch, which then you have this wonderful water repellent or sealant, and you could use it for canoes and such like that. There's also evidence that they would skim it off the water of rivers and streams because it naturally came to the surface, and they would skim it off and then process it that way. They would also use it on their skin when they painted their skin to help keep some of that paint on them as it dried and so on. So they did use it a lot. We just can't quite figure out how far back that date goes. But what about our area? What's going on? Well, in our area, we know that the Bothwell section was, it went through phases of inhabited and uninhabited and so on. We know in 1640, when Father Jean de Brebeuf came through, the neutrals were in our area. Father Jean de Brebeuf stayed about 6 months until he moved on into his history that many of us are very familiar with now, up in the Sioux and so on. In 1792, after a period of quiet and maybe no one living in the area, the Moravian missionaries came through with the Delaware people, and they set up settlement in what we now know as Fairfield. And of course, many of us are familiar with the War of 1812 history and how they changed side of the river and so on, but they came here next. And we know that they were using the oil as well. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit too. Let's get to the next big area of our history, and that discovery of oil. And that's with Simcoe. Now, some of you are going to look at this map and go, what on earth, right? But when Simcoe came through in, it was about February 15th of 1793, he records the oil seepage. Now, just before him, we have Abraham Iredell. He did surveys. So this is part of his map. And I'm going to share with you the second part of his map. But yes, this is what it looked like. And it is very difficult to read. Now, I know a bunch of you are researchers. And if you want to go check out this map, it's at the Archives of Ontario. You can also check out this map at the Elgin County site. They also have it on their website if you want to take a good look at it there too. But yeah, it is difficult to read. But here's the fun part. I love this next little bit. Here we go. On this map, we have the zone area. And you can see I've put in a little area. I've marked what it says there, made it a little bigger for you. It says Salt Spring. And then we have just below that, there's a little more writing, and it says Moravian Village. Yay! So like I said, in February 15th of 1793, Simcoe comes through and he records there's some oil seepage happening in the area. Lady Simcoe records in her diary on Sunday, March 10th, after a letter from her husband, that they discovered it by its smell, and they could smell it before they even saw it. Now, what was Simcoe doing in this area anyway? Simcoe was on his way to Detroit, and they just happened to be stopping in this area and making camp for the night. So there's our first big note of where these oil springs and these oily waters are. Now, in 1822, Samuel Smith, now he's also a surveyor, and in his field notes, he notes a spring near the Middlesex County line. And it is believed that it is this same spring that he's making note of. Now, these maps are a little hairy to look at, so I'm going to give you something just a little easier. This is our map of Zone Township in 1862. By this point, we're separated from Camden, and we're starting to settle a little more. Now, yeah, this is past Simcoe, but you have to note, we really didn't have a lot of settlement in this area. It is still the wilds. There are traditional trails that run along the river. And in 1817, we get our first European settlers outside of the Fairfield Mission. And as things progress in our county, these trails, these traditional trails along the river, eventually become our roads and help us to further our trade with Detroit, which is a very traditional thing for us to do. And you're going to hear a lot about that. We also know that by the time oil is fully discovered, we'll call it that, in an economic kind of sense, a commercial kind of sense, we know that our First Nations people were selling the oil, and they were getting $3 a gallon for it back then. Before the big commercial boom, they were taking that oil, they gathered it up. Sometimes they were skimming it off the traditional way of the blankets. They had taught some of the European settlers to do this too. They loaded it up and they barged it in barrels to Detroit. And we also know that they advertised for this oil use as a liniment, and you could use it internally too, by 1862. So they're already marketing this stuff, and they're doing all right by it. All right, and we're going to get a little closer shot here of that map. And you're going to notice on this map that I have pointed out with the arrow a very particular lot. That is lot 20 of the River Range. That's what it was known as in 1862. Now, this map is also really great for us to look at because it's showing how things are being laid out. And one of the big reasons that Bothwell is being laid out is because of George Brown. Now, George Brown wanted to lay out a town along the Great Western Railway. And this is really key for Bothwell and the oil industry. The Great Western Railway had just been extended in 1854. It extended from London to Windsor. Now we've got this great rail line that is running all the way from Niagara Falls and down to Windsor. So we're going to start getting a lot of goods through. So he wants to start a town. And in 1855, he needs a guarantee that he gets, and that's of a train station. So we know the train is going to stop here. He also gets something even better than that, and something you really need to survive as a town, or even before that, a village, a settlement of any sort. You need to be a mail stop, and he gets that guarantee as well. He gets it, though, at a loss for Moravia. They were the original mail stop, so they've lost it. And he had to bargain fairly hard for that. And but he gets it. So he buys 4,000 acres of land. He makes money off of lumber. Now, George Brown, he's one of our fathers of Confederation, so he's got that going for him, and that comes, as we know, a little bit later. He came to Canada from Scotland, and one of the big things he sets up is something called the Globe. We know it now as the newspaper called the Globe and Mail. So he is a businessman to the core. So he knows what he's doing. So he's starting to sell off all of this lumber. He lays out his town plots in the wilderness, basically, and then he starts to sell the plots of land. And he sells it mainly by auction. Now, when he's doing this, he keeps his farm. He loves his farm. By all accounts, he tries to get down to his farm in Bothwell as much as he can. It is a place that is basically a refreshment to his soul, and he enjoys it. He loves to farm. Now, that farm, however, surrounds Bothwell, and that's pretty amazing for him. Businessman to the core. Now, we know that Brown's property had oil on it. It's there, without a doubt. And he is going to, well, we would think, start becoming an oil man, but it's still a little bit too early for this. And he wants to do nothing more than farm. Now, he writes to his family in 1863, and he says, "The oil wells are a great fact. There seems no doubt that oil will be found here." So you have to remember, he also knows that not far away in Oil Springs, they've discovered oil in 1858, and the boom is on there. But why he doesn't go into the oil business, we don't know. We do know, though, by 1865, he is selling all of his property. And he does very well with this. So I guess the love of his farm gets outweighed. For example, to show you how well he did with his property, he would sell, before the oil boom, he could sell a fifth of his property for $200. Okay. Now, later on, and it was just months later, he would sell his property for $1,500 in gold. So the tides turned very quickly. He saw that it's time to, sell and get out of town. So he's one of the ones that did very well. And I always like to point out the ones that seemed to do well in the Bothwell boom were the ones that were in early and got out quick and sold off their lands and such, because those that were secondary, or even those that came in third, buying lands and stuff, they lost out and did not do well at all. Now, we know that a man by the name of Lick is the one that's credited to discovering oil. And I think you're starting to catch on. He wasn't the one that really discovered oil, but he's the one that got the boom going. But there were other entrepreneurs that came in and checked out Bothwell. So, for example, in 1857, Charles Tripp and James Miller Williams came to dig for oil. And you're probably thinking, who are these guys? Well, Charles Tripp and his brother Henry, they were already working the gum beds in Oil Springs. Now, Charles, he was interested mainly in making asphalt from the gum beds. He hadn't really clued into this lamp oil invention that was starting to take hold. And for some reason, I don't know why he ignored it. James Miller Williams was paying attention to Gessner and what was going on. And Gessner was the one that came up with kerosene. Now, at one point, Charles Tripp was running out of money. He couldn't get his product out of Oil Springs for many reasons. So he had to go find some money. So he went to Hamilton to James Miller Williams and convinced him to come down and invest in his company. And he sold off land to do it, and so on. So he convinced Miller Williams to come down And for some reason, we don't know why, they detoured and went to Bothwell instead of heading right to Oil Springs. And they started to dig for oil. Now, most likely, this is because we have for years have heard about the oil seepages in Bothwell. So they start to dig for oil. And when they get to about 27 feet, they get it. But it's not the oil that you're thinking of. It is a really good mix of oil and water, and they cannot control the water that's coming through. It's not going to be profitable. So they leave. They just abandon the well where they were digging. Again, in 1861, Duncan and Clark of Yorkville come and they drill near the town looking for oil. They were also unsuccessful. And as of note, just before they came to Bothwell to dig, they were in Oil Springs. And by 1861, they're having their heyday in Lambton County, just doing their thing with the oil. And that is a whole other story we can get into another time. But they're looking for oil. The promise is there in Bothwell. So when George Brown said, it's going to be a surefire thing, it must have been his gut telling him that, yeah, it's going to happen. And it does. So Lick. Now, Lick through history has been given a couple different names by historians. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with our local historian, Victor Lauriston. Lauriston starts out by calling him James when he writes about Lick. Eventually, though, he changes it and he calls him John. Other historians, though, have always called him John, and we even have a middle initial for him, John L. Lick. John came to our area from Ohio, and he came to Kent County with what is called a light drilling rig. Now, this drilling rig consisted of a 3-pole derrick and a springboard. So he starts to drill. He starts looking, first of all, near Chatham, and he goes just east of Chatham, somewhere on the Thames River. Don't exactly know where. He was unsuccessful, and he moves further in, and he comes to Bothwell. He does put down tests in various spots along the river, and he's still unsuccessful. And then he moves to his ravine. Now, Lick did come with some money to Canada, but it ran out pretty quickly. So he needed to come up with cash to keep prospecting. So he came up with this bright idea, and it's kind of more like a syndicate. So what he decided to do for the townspeople and farmers, he was going to be very considerate to them, and they could invest into his little company, for lack of a better word. And if they want in, they could purchase it for $10 a share. So $10 at this point is quite a lot of money. And if you couldn't afford the $10 up front, then you could work it off for a rate of $1 a day. So people started to invest. They believed in this man. There's going to be oil. There's little hints of it all over the place. So people started to work it off. After a while, people got a little tired of it. It's not producing, and they want out. Well, Lick's, I can't pay you. I don't have the money. I've spent it. So he gives them promissory notes, basically. So some people walk away. They're like, forget it. I've lost my money. I'm not coming back. Others do hang on to their promissory notes. Now, eventually, Lick runs out of funds again. And he's not doing well. He gets so deep in debt that nobody in town is going to give him credit at all. Not even the blacksmith is going to sharpen his chisels, his tools, the things that he's pounding into the ground with, and he needs them to be sharp if he's going to be successful. And from what we understand, he was a very resourceful man. I mean, hey, he came up with this $10 a share thing. And he comes up with a way of fashioning his own forge. He comes up a way with sharpening his own tools and making his own tools and so on. He came up with so many creative ways to keep drilling in that ravine. There is even a story of where he needs a new spring pole kind of thing, and there is a tree that's growing kind of sideways and out into the bank. And he uses that tree as part of his spring pole to keep going. So eventually his gusher comes on April 1st, 1863, at 224 feet down and 46 feet of which were rock. His gusher comes in, and it comes bursting to the surface, and it reaches the height of a tall man. Nothing in comparison to the gusher we get in Oil Springs. But still, it takes him 4 days to cap his gusher, which, that's pretty darn exciting for Oil Springs. And by this point, we're getting a little more knowledge on how to cap wells. But he has got his oil running all over the place in this ravine. So what's he going to do about it? Well, Lick decides that he's going to hire men because now he knows he's a surefire bet. People are going to invest with him. So he hires men at $1 a day to block off the ends of the ravine. And he forms a really large reservoir to hold the oil. And eventually it starts to overflow that as well. And people from the area are coming with buckets and taking the overflow and hauling it away because, hey, they're going to get a little bit of money too if they get to do that. But he has to wait for wooden tanks to come from Chatham so that he can start putting all of this into these tanks to hold everything. So then he can get it shipped off to the area. So he's doing very well. He's making great money. And there is a great story about Lick. His money has come in, and he is in the town of Bothwell, and he needs to get his watch fixed. And apparently he came to Canada with this watch. And he meets this man. He has no idea who he is. And he asks this man, hey, are you going to Chatham? And the man doesn't know that this is Lick, the man that's making it rich off of oil. He says, well, yeah, I am. He says, well, can you do me a favor? Can you get my watch fixed? And the guy says, yeah, I guess. He says, are you coming back? He says, yeah, I'm returning the next day on the next train. So he hands this man the watch. He hands this man a bunch of cash, and he sends him to Chatham to get the watch fixed. He doesn't even know who this man is. And the man recounts that Lick never even asked him his name. And that's how trusting he is. Or maybe he's just like, I'll buy a new watch. Who knows? But he does get his watch returned. The man is a good man, and he does return the watch to Lick, and that's when he discovers who he is. Now, Lick, however, does get outdone. There is a well on the pepper farm. The well on the pepper farm produces 240 barrels every 24 hours. And in today's money, that was over $23,000 a day that well was making. Now, what about Lick? How's he doing out there? Well, Lick, unfortunately, has hit a surface well, and his well doesn't last that long, but he's still making great money. Um, and before his well dries up on him, rumor has it that Lick was offered $1 million for the well. Other reports that he was offered a wheelbarrow of gold for his well, and he doesn't take it. Now, his well's making him about $10,000 a day. But it does, like I say, it dried up quickly. It was only a surface well, and he loses his money. Now, Lick still has the fever. He does sell his well just before it dried up. He got about $30,000 in it. So a far cry from that million or the barrel of gold. But he continues on speculating. We know he goes out near Thamesville and does some speculating there and so on. And basically he does it for the rest of his life. He never hits it again. And near the end of his days, we know that he was working for somebody out of London, and he spent his time traveling the Thames River buying fish for this person in London. And when Lick dies, he is penniless. When he dies, the town doctor, Dr. Pope, who knew Lick, and everybody in town apparently still knew Lick. Well, Dr. Pope went around and collected money so that Lick would have a decent coffin. And Lick is buried in Bothwell in the Potter's Field. So kind of sad for Lick, the man who basically brought fame and fortune to Bothwell. Now, on a funny side, there's a ghost on the oil fields. And this ghost, as we will call it, was reported in the Toronto Globe in the August 27th edition of 1861. And it was an article called The Oil Region. And it is about an Irish immigrant named Patrick and the satanic cooking spot out on the oil fields. Apparently, Patrick, like many Irish immigrants of the day, it is reported, brought with him his fear of ghosts and banshees and all the things that you can find in Ireland. And when they were out digging on the oil fields, or I should say drilling, when you're going down there, you're going to hit, your oil, but you're also going to encounter gases and such. And on one such occasion, Patrick was out there. He was only on the oil fields for a short time working, and they hit a gas vein, it is supposed, and the hissing and things that bellowed out and the smell scared Patrick so much that he declared it was Satan's cooking spot, and he abandoned his post and never worked in the oil fields again. It's just a fun little story from our oil fields in Bothwell. Now, what was going on with Bothwell when all of this boom was happening? Well, it is kind of like a fish tale. You know, when you catch a fish and the story about how the fish gets bigger and bigger every time. Well, this is what happens with the population in Bothwell. It gets greatly exaggerated. We know before the boom, there was about 500 people that lived in Bothwell. And the stories get reported that it's growing. The town gets up to 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 people living in Bothwell. I think when we're getting to that 8 and 10,000 numbers, we're getting a little bit on the exaggerated side. So I'm going to settle in with about that 6,000 number. It seems to be a little more realistic, and it seems to match with what people are telling us at that time. So Bothwell grows, of course. There are stories of people coming into town to Bothwell, and I should point out the speculators that are coming are largely Americans. So they are coming into town. They say they see them going, the townsfolk, the regular townsfolk that were there, see them going out into the forest, and by nighttime they have dragged enough lumber back and they have fashioned themselves a house and they are living in it, so that the next day they are going out to the oil fields. So it is growing at a phenomenal rate. There is even an account of a house on Peter Street that is now housing 50 people in it. 50 in one little house. And sometimes we think our houses are crowded. Anyway, it starts to grow like any boomtown, like a gold rush, like Oil Springs was doing at the time. Everybody's coming to make their fortune. Now, the businesses in Bothwell at this time seem to be the ones that really do well, other than the people who actually struck oil. At one point, the business directory had 10 pages of businesses that were in Bothwell because of the boom. And they were making everything for these oil men. Just, whatever they needed, they were trying to make for them. They had new construction, like I say, going on. So you needed people who were making frames for the doors and bringing in wood and lumber and so on for all of these. By mid-November of 1865, we had more boarding houses and hotels strung along Peter Street. It went as far out to a village, which is no longer called Kashmir. People were that far out and prospecting for oil. Now, Kashmir, which, like I say, is a village that no longer exists, they really started to boom as well as this kind of secondary business market. This is where you find a sash and door factory. They now have more village blacksmiths springing up, as did Bothwell. They have to make all the implements for the oilmen. We now have the Teamsters coming into town. Now, the Teamsters, they're the ones with the teams of horses pulling the oil wagons, and they have needs for those oil wagons, harnesses and things like that need to be made. Kashmir sees a grist mill coming up. Didn't have one before. There is an increase in bread that's being consumed by all these oil men and prospectors coming into town. And there is now a frequent shortage of food in both Bothwell and this little village of Kashmir. So food prices are really starting to go on the rise. Now, Peter Street in Bothwell is seeing traffic like never before. It is a direct route for the oil wagons from the oil fields, or as they called it, Derrickville. Remember those Threepole Derricks I showed you? Imagine those springing up all across the fields and the land. It looks like a forest of derricks there as well. So they are constantly clogging up the Peter Street with all these oil wagons and people coming into town for supplies and so on. So it is super busy. One of the other things happening in Bothwell, we're starting to get some complaints about the oilmen at the Sunday services of all things. It is said when these men came to town for the services, they, instead of sitting and listening like they should be, they would be sitting whittling and talking to each other about the week. And you could hear all of their conversations, good or bad, over the minister. So it is getting to be quite this town for everyone. Now, unfortunately, the boom doesn't last forever. We see prices and things starting to drop. Now, the zenith of our oil boom is about Christmas of 1865. That year in 1865, the price of oil steadily rose. It went from $10 a barrel that they were getting in 1861. And then, of course, it would dip and rose again in 1865 to that, to $11 a barrel by Christmas and into early 1866. Now, $10 in 1861 was worth $308.75 today. So by 1866, things start to crash. And I mean crash. We get down as low as 75 cents a barrel. Adding to our problems in Bothwell are the Civil War. A lot of our boom happens during the Civil War. And the Americans aren't too happy when they're over here. And we have the Fenians coming in, raiding our province. And there is threat of yet another war with the U.S. So many of these American oil speculators are getting nervous and they abandon their wells. We also have, on top of that, like I say, barrel of oil is crashing. We have oil running out and drying up because we have so many surface wells in the area. By the end of 1866, you can't give land away. Nobody wants it. You know, if you're short on cash, take my land as collateral. No way. And everybody's starting to leave town. It just isn't working out for us anymore. But there is a second wave. In 1895, we have a bit of a resurgence in the oil fields. And this is where you see some more of the traditional oilmen and the big guns of the oil industry in our area coming in. And Carmen and Fairbanks come into the area, and they start working the oil fields as well. So this picture you're looking at here is the Carmen and Fairbanks powerhouse on the fields, and it is still working to this. That powerhouse isn't working this day, but the oil field is still getting oil from it. And here's the inside of the powerhouse. So Bothwell really played a big factor in the area. In Kent, but it didn't hit the high notes like Oil Springs and the even higher notes of Petrolia. But it was still there. People still came, they still flocked. We are still producing oil like the other two oil towns. And it did shape Bothwell. For better or for worse, it shaped Bothwell. One of the other downfalls, of course, was the Great Fire. And it destroyed many of the buildings. And with the oil fields failing, there wasn't the money to rebuild. Reports have it as 59 buildings being destroyed. Some reports were 70. We even have as high as 100 buildings being destroyed. So instead of rebuilding, the threat of war and so on, our oil industry ends. But Bothwell is still here. Bothwell is still an oil town.
That was great. Thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. It's just amazing the ripple effect of something successful and how, as you said, it rippled into cashmere, and just how one prosperous thing affected, I'm sure, many, many, many lives. So that was amazing.
Yes. And we forget that other parts of Kent County prospered from Bothwell as well. I mean, we were making the barrels to hold all that oil in Chatham.
Great.
And so on. And then they started prospecting all over in Kent County. And eventually we find gas and so on. So yeah, those ripple effects are still affecting us to this day.
Yeah, and some of the humor, the ghost story, that was wonderful. It's yeah, you did a great presentation. You are a natural born storyteller. Angela, I was wondering, are there any questions?
So say, I didn't think I saw any coming up in the chat. I was kind of watching it as I went, but yeah, if anybody has questions, pop them in right now.
So there is one here. It says, where would we find the Bothwell business directories?
All righty. So one of the best things to do is to look at the library carries a lot of the business directories of our areas. Bothwell branch may have them there. You can also look, I know the Chatham Kent Museum has directories as well. They tend to pertain to Chatham, but there are some strays in the collection as well. And one of the best and easiest ways, especially in this time of COVID, is to go on the digital collections through the library. They have digitized so many of them in there. So take a look there. Just Google in I think it's Chatham Kent Library Digital Collection or something like that, yeah, and you can find it there.
Yeah, and I know that in our room, we also have, census records they might indicate, what someone's profession was for the town of Bothwell. And we do have some directories and, some other different resources that might be able to point somebody in some directions of what the businesses were and what folks were doing at that time. The first few maps that you showed too, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to be taking a look at those to see if their ancestors are mentioned on there. So those are some really good maps and resources that you pointed out to, check out the Ontario Archive site, and also Elgin, I think you said.
Yes. And for those looking for the Archives Ontario, they are up at the campus of York University. They have a lovely, lovely building now. So if you can get in there, it's a great resource. Plus, you can also take advantage at times. I don't know what now with COVID, but you have to make a lot of appointments. But the York libraries, they have different libraries there too. Great place to do research as well.
Right. And as you mentioned, we have stuff in our collection, but also the Chatham Kent Public Library has their McHugh room as well. So there's a lot of histories and information there, just like it probably is in all the other little towns in their own little collections in their library. So the libraries are still a great place to visit, to check out those, look for those resources. I thought there was actually 3 in the chat, but I don't see anything else.
One of the things while you're looking, I'll point out as well, a great place to go to when you're looking for your ancestors, especially if you're on that Lambton County, Kent County border, that line changes a lot. And you need to check out the Lambton County Archives. They've got great stuff in there that you can look up too, if you're looking for, and maps and so on. So don't forget them if you're along that line, maybe your ancestors are in there, because I say that line blurs a lot, the county line. So sometimes we're in Kent County, some next week, we could be in Lambton. So check them out.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that the boundaries move back and forth. And even we find that a lot with people just looking, for cemeteries and things like that, because they sort of bebopped. And that's, like you say, in one census will be recorded in Kent, and the next census the family's recorded in Lambton. Well, they didn't move, the boundaries moved.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good point to bring up. Besides kerosene, what was oil also used for during the boom was another question.
Yes. Yeah. So Oil, we tend to forget. We think of it always as gasoline. The first thing that really made it sellable was kerosene. We're always looking for better lighting when we had to move up from whale oil and so on. Then when we discover oil, it's a great lubricant. And it's not as refined as it is today. Back then, but yeah, they could use it for different lubricants, for things. Yeah, they used it further for medicines, and there were all kinds of quack things that came out through oil, just like any invention, you know. I mean, at one point we had electric hairbrushes for balding men. So yeah, if you could dream it up, they were using it. But oil was great because they could also, as they're pulling it out of the ground and they need to lubricate their own jerker lines and things like that, that's what they used. It was readily available. And then eventually, some people, as I've discovered, there was, we moved from steam engines to electric engines to power the jerker lines. Some people did try using gas engines, things like that as well. So they used it for everything.
Right. I think that's all the questions that we have, unless anybody else wants to take a couple minutes and pop some questions in there. But we had a lot of people join us, so that's fantastic.
Wonderful.
Yeah, from all over the place too. So I don't see any more, and our time is running out now. So we don't want to keep people much longer past 8 o'clock and take up their time. But again, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Do you want to do a little plug that if people, you know, want to pop by and see you, are you open? Will you be open? You have times if they want to learn more?
Yes, well, right now, the Oil Museum, we are under a huge renovation and reconstruction and redevelopment of the museum. And of course, with the pandemic, supply lines got slowed down. So we are past our opening date. So keep an eye on our Facebook page, keep an eye on our webpage and so on. We are going to reopen again, and it's going to be wonderful.
Okay, that's a great
I'm excited to reopen.
Right. So you do have a Facebook group, which people can view. So that's something good. The name of it, the title of it, do you off the top of your head?
Oil Museum of Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they can do a search for that.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate it. Thank you, all of our people who attended tonight, and we will see you in October, and hopefully we'll see you in person soon. Definitely drop by our resource library. As I say, we're open Friday to Saturdays now, and we just want to hear from you. So drop us a line, send us an email, and we just like to stay in touch. So thank you, everyone. Good night, and have a good Friday evening. Thank you.